Imagine sitting in a jail cell. You've just been handed a 6-year prison sentence.
Right.
You look up at the judge and ask why the sentence is so remarkably harsh for the minor offenses you actually admitted to. And the judge points to a computer monitor and essentially says, well, because the risk assessment algorithm told me you're a danger.
Wow.
Yeah. So you ask how the algorithm arrived at that conclusion. And the judge admits they just don't know.
Of course they don't.
Right. So you appeal to the state Supreme Court, demanding to see the math that took away your freedom.
Yeah.
And the company that built the software steps in and says, sorry, the formula is a corporate trade secret. Nobody gets to look under the hood.
Which is just wild.
Yes. So there you sit, locked in a cage your entire life, derailed by a mathematical black box that literally no human being in the courtroom understands.
And, the most terrifying part of that scenario is that it isn't science fiction. It's not some thought experiment. That is the precise reality of a 2013 legal case.
Wait, 2013?
Yeah, 2013. A man named Eric Loomis in Wisconsin. It's really a perfect, chilling distillation of the crisis we are unpacking today. We're no longer just dealing with tools. We're dealing with an alien architecture that is actively making decisions about human lives.
Welcome to the deep dive. If you're listening to this, you are the crucial third mind in this conversation. We do this for you, to take these massive, overwhelming concepts and make sense of them together.
Exactly.
The source materials we're tearing into today, they're anchored by a really profound chapter titled Democracies. Can we still hold a conversation? And it forces us to look at the computer-based network not as just a venue for social media, but as a bureaucracy.
A relentless, entirely non-human bureaucracy.
Yes. So our mission today is to figure out whether the fragile, messy, deeply human invention of democracy can actually survive an era defined by artificial intelligence.
It's a monumental question. And just to set the parameters for how we're going to approach this, while the source material deals with high-stakes concepts like civilizational collapse, the author is not dealing in doomsday hysteria.
Right. It's not a panic piece.
Not at all. It's a cold, rigorous, historical analysis. The foundational premise here is that every single time humanity invents a truly paradigm-shifting piece of technology, whether that's the steam engine or the microprocessor, human society is forced to completely reinvent its economic and political structures.
We've stood on this kind of cliff before.
We have. The difference now is the sheer speed of the transformation and the fact that the technology itself might soon be capable of outthinking us.
Okay, let me stop you there, because the mechanics of that historical transition are fascinating. My immediate instinct when I read about AI changing the world is to think, well, we'll figure it out.
Right, we always do.
Yeah, like we figured out electricity, we figured out cars. But the source material insists that before we start making assumptions about our glorious AI future, we have to look backward at humanity's actual track record.
And that track record is, it's incredibly bloody.
It really is. It's like we've been handed the keys to a spaceship before we even know how to drive a car.
That's a great way to put it. It's a catalog of immense suffering. The text challenges our sanitized modern narrative of technological progress. We tend to look at the Industrial Revolution as a straight line from the steam engine to smartphones.
Just a minor speed bump along the way.
Exactly. We ignore the toll it took to figure out how to organize ourselves around that new power.
Right. The text brings up the Luddites as the perfect example of this sanitized history. Today, if you can't figure out how to, sync your Bluetooth headphones, people call you a Luddite.
Like it's an insult for being backward.
Yeah. But the text re-examines who the Luddites actually were in the 19th century. They were highly skilled textile workers watching their entire livelihoods being systematically dismantled by early industrial machinery.
They didn't smash the looms because they were stupid.
No. They smashed them because they understood exactly what that technology was designed to do to their political and economic power.
They recognized that the technology was transferring the value of a human being's lifetime of acquired skill directly into the pockets of the person who owned the machine.
Exactly.
The source makes the argument that the Luddites weren't entirely wrong in their dread. The standard narrative says, well, they were just paranoid because eventually industrialization made everyone wealthier.
But that word eventually carries a lot of weight.
It carries hundreds of millions of victims. Getting to the happy ending of the Industrial Revolution was brutal. Novel technology doesn't trigger disasters because the machinery itself is malicious.
Right.
It triggers disasters because it takes a massive amount of time and trial and error for human societies to figure out how to structure themselves around that new power.
And during that trial and error phase, people experiment. The text outlines how some of the darkest chapters of modern history, imperialism, Stalinism, Nazism, were fundamentally incredibly costly experiments in how to structure an industrial society.
To understand why those experiments happen, you really have to look at the sheer appetite of an industrial economy.
Like the need for raw materials.
Yes, an agrarian society is largely self-contained. You grow your food, make your clothes, but the moment you transition to an industrial model, your society develops this ravenous hunger. Factories require a massive, uninterrupted influx of raw materials from outside your borders.
And then you have to sell all that mass-produced stuff somewhere.
Exactly. You desperately need enormous foreign markets to sell those goods to.
So the politicians of the 19th century looked at that logistical reality and concluded that the only viable way to survive was to build an empire. If you didn't conquer colonies to secure your supply chains, your competitors would.
That was the prevailing logic. It was a race for survival fueled by steam and telegraphs. Countries that possessed massive empires expanded them with brutal efficiency.
Britain, Russia, the US, Japan.
Right. They leveraged mass-produced rifles and industrialized logistics to sweep across the globe, dismantling indigenous ways of life. It took more than a century of global misery before a consensus emerged that industrial empires were actually a terribly inefficient way to secure resources.
But the learning curve didn't stop there. It got significantly darker in the 20th century.
Much darker.
The text frames figures like Hitler and Stalin not merely as ideological fanatics, but as leaders who viewed the Industrial Revolution as a tool of total transformation. They saw industrialism as a furnace.
A literal furnace to melt down messy human structures.
Exactly, to forge a mathematically perfect society.
They witnessed the absolute devastation of World War I, the first total industrial war, and they decided that surviving required absolute totalitarian control over every facet of human existence.
Everything had to be centralized.
The economy, politics, media, family. They combined new technologies like train networks, telegraphs, and mass media to create state apparatuses of unprecedented power.
And the source makes a deeply unsettling point.
Yeah.
If you looked around the globe in 1940, it was incredibly easy to believe that the totalitarian models were the wave of the future.
They appeared decisive and relentlessly efficient.
Meanwhile, the liberal democracies looked incredibly weak and fractured. The two world wars and the Cold War were essentially massive referendums on how humanity should manage industrial power.
And we really must not forget the biological toll of those experiments, which the text explicitly highlights.
Oh, the statistics on that are staggering.
Yeah. Vertebrate populations on Earth declined by roughly 60% between 1970 and 2014. Up to 58,000 species go extinct every single year.
So we still haven't actually figured out how to build a sustainable industrial society.
Not at all. The jury is entirely still out on whether we can manage 19th century technology without destroying our biosphere.
Which brings us to a piece of historical math from the text that genuinely made me put the pages to and just stare at the wall.
The C- equation.
Yes. The author asks you to consider this. If humanity had to endure global imperialism, 2 world wars, the Holocaust, the gulags, and the nuclear brinkmanship of the Cold War, just to learn how to adapt to steam power and early electronics.
What is the learning curve going to look like for artificial intelligence and bioengineering?
It's exactly.
It is a sobering calculation. The text essentially gives humanity a C- on our 20th century exam. We passed only in the sense that we didn't completely annihilate ourselves.
Barely passed.
Right. But the technologies we are unleashing now operate on an exponentially higher plane. The margin for error is non-existent. A C- performance in the age of AI is fatal.
But wait, let me push back on this a bit, because there's a counter-argument to all this gloom. Didn't democracy ultimately win out over totalitarianism in the 20th century?
It did.
We outlasted the Soviet Union, we defeated fascism, we figured out that a democratic system was uniquely equipped to handle an industrial society because it has built-in mechanisms to self-correct. Why wouldn't that just happen again?
That is the pivotal question, and the text validates that perspective. Democracy triumphs because its feedback loops like elections and a free press allow society to pivot when a policy is failing.
Right.
But the source raises a darker structural concern. Are the foundational architectures of 21st century information networks fundamentally incompatible with those democratic feedback loops?
What do you mean by fundamentally incompatible?
Well, remember, for most of human history, large-scale democracy was practically impossible because we lacked the information technology to coordinate it. It only became feasible under specific technological conditions. The fear is that new technology could alter the landscape so drastically that democracy becomes mechanically impractical.
Okay, let's unpack exactly how that mechanical breakdown might happen, starting with the concept of absolute digital surveillance.
This is a big one.
We hear the word surveillance all the time, but the text asks us to imagine a state where a government or a corporation literally knows more about your internal biological and psychological state than you do.
It isn't just about tracking where you drive.
Right, it's about tracking your heart rate when you read a specific political headline, or knowing your exact emotional triggers. If an entity has that level of microscopic insight, elections cease to be a reflection of the public will. They just become a manipulated authoritarian ritual.
But the source material provides a very crucial caveat here. Technology is not deterministic. The presence of a capability does not mandate its deployment.
Total surveillance is a choice.
Exactly. To illustrate this, the text points to the 1970s. Romania was under a brutal dictatorship that used armies of secret police to monitor its citizens.
But the text notes that democratic nations like Denmark and Canada had the exact same, if not better, technological capabilities at the time. They had the wiretaps and the databases.
But they actively, collectively chose not to build a surveillance state. They deployed their resources toward public health and education.
And their societies vastly outperformed the surveillance states.
The lesson is clear. Just because we have the capability to monitor every digital interaction doesn't mean total surveillance is our inevitable destiny.
So how do we actually build the guardrails today? The text lays out 4 ancient fundamental principles that we have to adapt to modern tech if we want democracy to survive. The first one is benevolence.
And the text provides an analogy here that is incredibly clarifying.
Yeah, the Nike analogy, I love this. Imagine Nike offered you a deal. We will give you free shoes for the rest of your life. In exchange, we just need full, unlimited access to your personal diary, your medical records, and the ability to sell your deepest secrets to the highest bidder.
Every rational person would reject that offer out of hand. The invasion of privacy is vastly disproportionate to the value of the shoes.
We would think it was a psychopathic business model. And yet the text points out that this is the exact foundational business model we have enthusiastically accepted from the tech giants.
We trade our most intimate profiles for free email and maps.
Yes. Why do we accept this?
To solve this, the text introduces the concept of fiduciary duty. Think about the relationship you have with your doctor. They know your genetic predispositions and bad habits, but you don't live in fear of your doctor because the legal framework of a fiduciary duty mandates that they must act entirely in your best interest.
If they sell your medical profile, they lose their license.
Precisely. The source asks a brilliant question. Why haven't we extended that ancient principle to the algorithms that manage our digital lives? Right now, their financial incentive is completely misaligned with our well-being.
So the executives at search engines should have a fiduciary duty to the user.
Yes. The text suggests we could mandate a shift. Maybe we pay a subscription fee so we are the customer, not the product. Or we treat basic search and networking as essential public infrastructure, funded by tax dollars and heavily regulated.
Which leads directly into the second rule for democratic survival: decentralization. A healthy democratic society simply cannot permit all of its vital information to be concentrated into a single hub.
The text gives a compelling example here regarding medical databases.
Right. Scientifically, creating a centralized national medical database would be amazing. You could track pandemics in real time. But the text vehemently warns against taking the next logical step, merging that medical database with the local police, national intelligence, tax authorities, and banks.
If you view society strictly through the lens of efficiency, merging them makes perfect sense. It would make a detective's job incredibly fast.
But the text argues that hyper-efficiency is the paved highway to totalitarianism. For democracy, inefficiency is a feature, not a bug.
The friction created by separate systems protects individual liberty. It is inherently safer if your employer, your bank, and the police don't possess a panoramic view of your entire existence.
And it prevents easy censorship. If every institution draws from one data hub, you don't have to burn books, you just tweak the algorithm at the source.
Exactly. Now, the third rule we need to establish is mutuality. If surveillance is going to exist, it cannot be a one-way mirror.
If the government surveils the bottom must surveil the top.
The contrast the text provides is stark. Consider the FSB in Russia. They possess a staggering amount of data on the daily lives of Russian citizens, but the mutuality is zero. The average Russian citizen knows absolutely nothing about the internal budgets or private assets of the FSB leadership.
The power dynamic is entirely asymmetric.
But we can look at the corporate world too. Amazon or TikTok possess incredibly granular profiles of your exact consumer preferences. Yet, you know almost nothing about the algorithms they use or which politicians they lobby.
The flow of information is a waterfall. It only goes one direction.
Democracy requires equilibrium. The text argues we should be using AI to audit government contracts, expose corporate tax evasion, and track political bribery in real time.
That brings us to the fourth rule, which I honestly found the most conceptually difficult but also the most profound: change and rest.
This is a fascinating concept.
The source explains that historically, oppressive systems maintain control by either denying human beings the ability to change or denying them the opportunity to rest.
Let's break that down. A rigid caste system oppresses people by insisting they are unchangeable. You are born into a specific status and you are permanently fixed there.
No matter your effort.
Right. On the other end, totalitarian regimes like Stalin's Soviet Union oppressed people through relentless pressure to change. The state was constantly demanding that citizens mold themselves into the ideal new socialist human. There was never a moment of rest.
So how does that apply to a modern digital network? The text uses healthcare data to illustrate the tension between rigid algorithms and dynamic algorithms.
Right. Imagine a health insurance algorithm looks at your DNA, your grocery purchases, and calculates you have a 91% probability of a heart attack by age 50.
If the algorithm is rigid, it treats you like a fixed block of matter. It stamps you with a high-risk label. And as a result, your insurance premiums skyrocket, the bank denies your mortgage. Your destiny is sealed by the math.
That is the digital equivalent of a caste system. But human biology isn't fixed. So the text proposes dynamic algorithms. Instead of a permanent label, it offers a personalized pathway out of the risk, giving you dietary adjustments to actually hack your own biology.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting because I have to push back on this. Isn't a dynamic algorithm just a digital, omnipotent, nagging parent?
It certainly could be.
If it constantly demands I exercise and eat less sodium, or else my social credit score drops, that sounds like a tyrant, I'd be absolutely exhausted. You would never be allowed to just be imperfect.
You've isolated the exact danger. Navigating the middle path between a rigid caste system that writes you off and a relentless totalitarian molding process that demands constant optimization is going to be a perpetual struggle. Our democratic institutions have to ensure the algorithms are calibrated to allow for human frailty and rest.
And as stressful as managing that surveillance balancing act is, the text makes it clear that privacy is really only half the battle. The other massive systemic shock we are facing is what AI is about to do to human livelihoods.
The job market turmoil.
Yes, automation threatens to destabilize the job market, which can swiftly kill a democracy. The source makes a deeply unsettling historical parallel with the Weimar Republic.
In 1928, the Nazi Party won less than 3% of the vote. The democratic government seemed stable.
But then the crash of 1929 happened.
Unemployment skyrocketed to nearly 25% by early 1932. Within less than 5 years, the Democratic Republic completely disintegrated, and Hitler emerged as absolute dictator.
3 years of catastrophic unemployment was all it took.
So the vital question is, if the transition to an AI economy causes even more severe disruptions, how can our fragile democratic systems survive the shockwaves? The existential threat is the turbulence of the transition period itself.
And what makes this transition so terrifying is that our human intuition about what skills will actually be automated is completely backward. We tend to think that physical, blue-collar work is easy for machines and high-level intellectual work is safe.
But the text dismantles that idea. Pure intellectual skills are actually vastly easier to automate than complex motor skills.
The source illustrates this with Hubert Dreyfus's 1972 book, What Computers Can't Do. He claimed a computer could never beat a human chess champion.
Because chess represents the pinnacle of human intellectual strategy.
Right. Fast forward to today, and beating the world chess champion is a parlor trick for a free app on your phone. But clearing dirty dishes from a busy restaurant table is incredibly difficult for a robot.
Navigating unpredictable physical space took millions of years of evolution to perfect.
And that exact same dynamic applies to medicine. AI can do a doctor's pattern recognition diagnosis better than humans, but it can't physically lean over a hospital bed and change a bandage on a crying child like a nurse can.
The physical realities of nursing remain incredibly resistant to automation.
Okay, I understand why motor skills are hard for AI. But what about jobs that rely fundamentally on empathy? We assume understanding human emotion is our impenetrable fortress. But the text brings up a ChatGPT empathy test from 2023 that is honestly chilling.
the levels of emotional awareness scale.
Yes. Researchers fed the AI highly charged, complex scenarios, and it scored almost perfectly. It significantly outperformed the average human population.
And in another study, patients rated medical advice written by ChatGPT as vastly more empathetic than advice from human doctors.
Why? Because the AI doesn't work a 14-hour shift. It
Yeah.
doesn't get burnt out. It just accesses a finely tuned map of human emotional patterns and delivers the optimal response without having any distracting feelings of its own.
An entity doesn't need to actually experience emotion to expertly navigate it.
But what about jobs that require a real relationship, like a priest? The text says a robot could easily do a wedding ceremony mechanically, but people want a conscious entity, right? We want someone who actually feels.
What's fascinating here is the psychological insight the text unveils. We misunderstand the causal relationship between consciousness and emotional connection. We think we verify an entity as conscious first, and then we form a bond. But historically, it's the reverse.
It's the pet phenomenon.
Exactly. If you own a dog, you assume they feel a complex tapestry of love and guilt, not because of a neurobiological study, but because you are deeply attached to them. If an AI acts as your confidant for years, and you become emotionally attached, society will inevitably begin to treat those entities as if they are conscious.
Granting them legal personhood, just like we do for corporations today.
Yes. And if humans project genuine consciousness onto AI, then even jobs reliant on mutual relationship therapists, clergy, can be automated.
So the real crisis won't necessarily be zero jobs, but the psychological torture of constantly retraining for new jobs every few years. You master a profession, it gets automated, you scramble to retrain, and 5 years later that gets automated too.
The stamina required for that volatility will break people.
And a chronically stressed, constantly unemployed population is a volatile one. According to the source material, this immense technological and economic pressure has already broken one of our oldest political traditions.
The political fallout.
Yes. Now, right here, I need to explicitly state to everyone listening, this deep dive is completely impartial. We are simply analyzing the historical and political theories presented in the source text. We are not taking a partisan stance, endorsing any candidate, or bashing any party. We're just unpacking the mechanics of the author's argument.
And the specific dynamic the text analyzes is grounded in centuries of political philosophy. It defines a healthy democracy as a dialogue between progressives who want to fix the messy system by engineering something new.
And conservatives who want to cautiously preserve what works.
Exactly. This is Burkean conservatism. The idea that social reality is too complex to engineer from scratch. If you rip up the organic web of traditions, you trigger unforeseen disasters.
Like the Bolshevik Revolution.
Right. Historically, being conservative was about pace, not a specific religion or policy. It was about managing the speed of change to preserve stability.
But the text points out a radical shift in the 2010s and 2020s. Conservative parties, like the U.S. Republican Party under Donald Trump, have arguably become revolutionary parties.
Instead of conserving institutions like the transfer of power or the civil service, they aim to destroy and rebuild them from scratch.
The text contrasts Burke's horror at the storming of the Bastille with the enthusiasm of many Trump supporters observing the Jan 6 Capitol storming. It's a structural inversion. Traditionally, progressive parties are now awkwardly playing the role of cautious guardians of the old order.
It is a massive realignment.
So why did this conservative suicide happen?
The text hypothesizes that the accelerating pace of technology makes conserving the old world feel completely impossible to voters. If a left-wing, tech-driven revolution feels inevitable, the only countermove is a preemptive, radical right-wing revolution.
They feel the middle ground has evaporated.
Yes. The text contrasts this with the 1930s. Germany and the U.S. both faced 25% unemployment. Germany fell to Hitler. But the U.S. survived via FDR's New Deal.
Because American democracy had deeper institutional roots and the flexibility to drastically reinvent its social contract without destroying democratic governance.
Exactly. Democracy's superpower is flexibility and self-correction.
But for that self-correcting mechanism to function, voters and politicians actually have to understand what is going on. And that brings us to the most terrifying concept in the text. Unfathomability.
Dictatorships thrive on being unfathomable. It shields them from accountability. But democracies die from it.
Historically, bureaucrats were human. Even when they were racist or cruel, they were understandable.
The text uses Brown v. Board of Education in 1951. The bureaucrats enforcing segregation were operating on ancient biological dramas of us versus them.
Right. Humans understand that logic. The Supreme Court could interrogate the human texts and strike the racism down. But by contrast, look at the 2013 Eric Loomis case we opened with.
Loomis was sentenced based on the Compass algorithm. He couldn't see how it worked, the judge couldn't understand it, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court basically shrugged.
They allowed a mathematical black box to take away his freedom. And algorithms are infinitely more complex now than they were in 2013.
Which brings up the fascinating move 37 from the 2016 AlphaGo match against Leith et al.
Oh, this blew my mind. For 2,500 years, human minds played Go. And AlphaGo made a move so alien that commentators literally thought it was a glitch.
Leith et al. Had to leave the room for 15 minutes to emotionally process it.
But it wasn't a glitch. It was non-human brilliance, and it won the game. But the crazy part is that Mustafa Suleyman from DeepMind admitted they couldn't explain why the AI made the move. It's a genuine black box.
The engineers who built it couldn't trace the decision-making process.
So what does this all mean for us? If I get denied a loan by a bank's AI, and the EU enacts the right to an explanation under GDPR, won't the bank just have to tell me why I didn't get the loan?
The text addresses this by exposing the fallacy of the single cause. Humans like one dominant reason. I didn't go to your wedding because my mom is sick.
Right.
But algorithms use thousands of microscopic data points simultaneously. The text presents a hilarious but bleak hypothetical bank letter.
1,000-page letter.
Yeah. It says, you lost 8 points because you used an iPhone, but you lost 50 points because your battery was under 25% when you applied.
Wait, really? Over a phone battery?
To a human, it sounds absurd. But the neural network aggregated 10,000 data points against millions of past defaults. A human mind simply cannot vet an algorithm that operates on that scale.
The complexity renders it entirely unfathomable. The text mentions Black Mirror's Nosedive episode as an example of how artists need to help us understand these invisible structures. If we can't visualize the danger, we won't regulate it.
There is a silver lining proposed, though. Maybe we can use AI sidekicks to audit other AIs.
Setting a digital thief to catch a digital thief?
Yes. Specialized regulatory agencies could deploy vetting algorithms to hunt for discriminatory outputs in a bank's neural network, catching biases that human judges secretly harbor but hide behind legal rationalizations.
But even if we create AI auditors, there is one final immediate threat to the public square that could burn the democratic conversation to the ground before we even get to the future.
Digital anarchy.
Exactly. Large-scale democracy requires a free public conversation and institutional trust. In the 20th century, we had human gatekeepers, like newspaper editors. Social media removed the friction, which led to digital anarchy.
For the first time in history, democracy must contend with non-human voices actively manipulating the debate.
The text states that in the 2016 U.S. election, 20% of tweets were bots. And by 2022, 5% of Twitter users were bots, generating up to 29% of the content.
And these aren't dumb spam bots anymore.
No. ChatGPT can write highly persuasive, misleading texts. A 2023 study showed that humans actually find AI-generated fake news more logically structured and reliable than human-written fake news.
The machine is vastly more persuasive than we are.
Imagine arguing politics online with an AI. You can't change its mind, it doesn't care, it doesn't vote. But it learns exactly how to manipulate you. It mass-produces intimacy to shift your worldview on behalf of a foreign government or corporation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text brings in philosopher Daniel Dennett's solution. For thousands of years, society survived by harshly outlawing counterfeit money because it destroyed trust in the financial system.
We must now outlaw counterfeit humans.
We have to explicitly prohibit any algorithmic agent from passing itself off as a human being.
But wait, doesn't banning bots violate freedom of speech? If I write a script to auto-tweet my political opinions, isn't that my right?
The text's stance is unequivocal. Bots do not have human rights. A software program does not have freedom of speech.
So an AI doctor is fine as long as it explicitly identifies as an AI with a digital watermark. The crime is the deception.
Precisely. Furthermore, if an algorithm curates our public debate using outrage as a business model, it must be radically transparent and regulated by human institutions. The libertarian myth of a completely unregulated information market spontaneously generating truth is just that, a naive myth.
Wow. We have covered an immense landscape today. We've seen how the Industrial Revolution nearly broke us, how surveillance threatens our autonomy, how the job market is gutting our politics, how AI is an unfathomable black box, and how counterfeit bots are poisoning the public square.
The breakdown is already here.
Yeah, as the text notes, U.S. politicians can barely agree on the facts of the 2020 election anymore. The network is buckling.
It is. And I want to deliver one final chilling thought for the listener to take with them. The text mentions at the very end that if democracies fall, human dictators have their own profound reasons to be terrified of AI.
Why would a dictator be terrified? It gives them ultimate control.
Think about it. Dictators rely entirely on absolute loyalty and being the smartest, most powerful entity in the room. What happens to a paranoid human tyrant when they deploy an unfathomable alien AI to control their population, only to realize the AI is millions of times smarter than they are, and it doesn't need them at all? Perhaps the real battle of the 21st century isn't just democracy versus dictatorship, but human control versus a completely alien bureaucracy.
That is a staggering perspective. We really have been handed the keys to a spaceship, and we have to ensure it doesn't just throw us out the airlock. Thank you to everyone listening for joining us on this deep dive into these incredible sources. Keep asking questions and demand that the technology built for us actually serves us. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.